All right, I think we can start. Welcome everyone to using third-party JavaScript libraries with Lightning components. I know it's a long title. Hopefully you guys found it and are in the right session. I'm William, ISV Technical Evangelist here at Salesforce. And joining me today is Victor Carrion from Epiphany.
Yep, my name is Victor from Epiphany. Can I talk about Epiphany real quick?
Sure.
Okay. We are a PDO, product development outsourcer that helps ISVs build apps and launch it into the App Exchange. We had the pleasure of doing a bunch of Lightning components, some of which are in these sessions, including this one. And so we're really excited to share what we've learned with everyone here.
Awesome. So let's get started. All right, so this is our agenda today. Key topics we're going to cover. The first one is actually Lightning Locker Service. You might be wondering, isn't this a JavaScript session? But the thing is, Locker Service is being rolled out right now, and it's going to be here. If you want your component to work, you'll need to make sure it works with Locker Service. So we'll touch on that a little bit early on to kind of talk about what Locker really is, what are the scopes, and how we're rolling them out. After that, we'll kind of do like the getting started of third-party JavaScript libraries. So kind of show you how to get started, include it into your component, get your first MVP to work. After that, we'll talk a little bit on the Lightning framework itself. Kind of just show you how it can work with the libraries you're using and might actually add a lot more value to it. And lastly, we'll talk about really the backup plan. So what if you tried everything, but you just can't get your component to work properly with the libraries? What are the options to go around there? And please keep any questions till the end. We have a QA time set up and a mic right in the middle. So near the end, you can go up and we'll answer your questions or further afterwards. Sweet. So what is Locker Service? Locker is a security layer we added on top on Lightning now. When we launched Lightning and Lightning components, we kind of give our developers and partners this ability to really develop in what we call multi-tenancy of the browser, right? Your component is added into the page, into the DOM, instead of iframing all the different sub-pages in there. And one of the issues is with all that multi-tenancy, there might be risk of security or stability with the conflicting of different libraries or just developers accessing things they shouldn't have. And so Locker Service is here to help, prevent and protect a few key things like cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, and also kind of prevent people from climbing window objects and reading data that's rendered that they shouldn't have. And lastly, we also prevent the call to unsecure or undocumented private APIs. It just, we want to make sure trust is our number one value for our customers, and we have to enforce these security measurements for our customers. We do have a Dreamforce session on Locker Service itself. I highly recommend it. Although it's yesterday, if you guys missed it, I believe the recording will be on it shortly after Dreamforce, so make sure you check that out. So a little bit on the Locker Service rollout itself. We're actually splitting the rollout into two phases. Phase one is actually live already, partially. The main enforcement on that one is to prevent the use of non-public APIs, for calls, and also enforcing JavaScript strict mode. So what I mean by that is, for example, you're trying to create a window object, you won't be able to access that. You have to make sure you specify the variable you're accessing, those kind of practice. And then for phase two, that will be kind of enforcing the CSP, content security policy. And that can include, unsafe eval and many other web development standards. I have a resource slide in the end with some links to the content that you guys can access. One thing to note is we didn't start, creating these limits ourselves. These are actually standards set up by what we call TC39. It's like a organization of all the browser providers and then web providers to kind of understand what's a secure web development practice. And what I meant by two phases is currently in the winter release, we have our phase one or the JavaScript strict mode rolled out as a critical update. So your admins can go in and toggle it on and off depending on what they have. We did that because we understand many developers already built Lightning components. Actually, let's show of hands. How many of you have built a component so far? Yeah, actually quite a lot. I'd say pretty much half the room. So if you haven't, make sure you rework your component to at least work for strict mode. But you do need to look forward ahead because come spring, we will be permanently enable the JavaScript strict mode for all the components. And we will be kind of soft rolling out the phase 2, which is our CSP enforcement. And come summer, we will permanently enable both enforcements. So really, if you want to make sure your component works right now, at least get the strict mode on, but do look forward to support the CSP enforcement. One tool to recommend is to use our Lightning CLI utility. There's a separate session on that as well. I didn't want to go too deep into it. But when you use the CLI tool to scan your component, it will check for both the strict mode and the CSP. So that's a good way to help you get prepared for the future rollouts. All right, so we're going to get started with the third-party JavaScript. This part is a little bit more introductory. So how many of you have built a Visualforce so far? Any Visualforce pages? Yep, of course. I think it's probably like 90% by now. So it's actually a really similar practice. Like I mentioned, we don't support non-public APIs. And so you do need to get your JavaScript libraries and upload them into our static resources. Once you do that, then you can access it in your Lightning component using our Lightning markup, LTNG required, and then the scripts showing where the resource location is. We do have a after script loaded function behind it, so you can kind of call any instantiation you might have, or any initialization you might need. One thing to note is that the scripts are loaded in the order they are listed. So if you have any dependencies, you want to make sure you load the foundational one first and then what you need to execute in the end so you don't have any issues starting your component. And again, of course, use CLI tool to check compatibility. The moment you add it in there, you can kind of test to see if there's any known issues that's hitting on Locker service. And we also have a developer guide on CLI. I highly recommend you to check that out. The slides will be uploaded shortly after the session as well, so you can check that out on the session record. All right, so we'll show you a first demo of our Lightning component and kind of get to see how we're going to make it work and evolve it throughout this session.
All right, let's get a third-party library into a component. So before we get into the meat and the code of it, I just wanted to show the demo that we will be using. It's right here in front of everybody. And what we want to focus on is this map component on the right. What's happening is it's loading an address and geolocation and then zooming into where it is. It looks a lot like Google, but it's actually not. And the first thing that we want to show is that we're using a plugin called Leaflet, and we chose to use Leaflet because Leaflet does allow you to download it and then host it on your own server. We uploaded that static resource as a zip, and then we reference it in the code.
And notice Victor here uploaded the static resource as a zip. I guess most of you, since you have worked with Visualforce or Lightning components, pretty familiar. But for those of you who just got started, it's highly recommended that you upload a zip file instead of independently all the CSS and JS, because otherwise when you need to update your library versions, you got all these separate uploads you need to take care of. You can access the whole zip file within your Lightning component using the LTNG tag, and then choose the specific JS or CSS that you want to access. So that's what we highly recommend for you to get started with.
Yep. And now that we have this zip in our static resources, let's see how our code pulls it in. So here we are in the dev console. This code is the map component code. And if you notice right away in the middle, we are using the Lightning require tag that William talked about. We're pulling in the CSS from the zip and the JavaScript file as well. This /resource/ is a prepend that will directly access static resources, and then you can put the static resource name. In this case, it was leaflet, which references the zip, and you could get any file inside of it. Also, we have the after scripts loaded attribute, which is calling a method on the controller. So let's see what that does. Here's that method that it's calling, JS loaded. It's just a function that gets the component and other useful things, does a few data pulling, and then it runs a helper method called generate map. So generate map does a little bit of checking, but the important and useful stuff relevant to this presentation is where it actually leverages Leaflet and it initializes the map. That's on the highlighted code. So here we're creating a new instance of Leaflet with new.l or new.l.map, and then we're passing in a ID of a DOM element that's in the component as a locator to where to put the map. So this is looking for the ID of map. And then if we look inside of the component file with the DOM nodes, we find this div with ID of map. And so what's happening is after the library is loaded, it runs JS loaded, which runs the helper, initializes Leaflet, and puts the output inside of this div. And you end up seeing this.
Sweet. So that's how we got our MVP started. Now I'd like to talk a little bit on the Lightning framework itself. So Lightning framework is provided by our platform. You can just reference it without having to import any additional libraries. It's really powerful. I mean, we're starting to build additional features. Right now, there's different events they can listen to, and there's also a few functions that you can use to access pieces of your Lightning component. And the reason we highly recommend leveraging that is likely there might be certain pieces of the libraries you're using or framework that won't work properly under Locker service. And so Lightning framework could help you address some of the issues. And of course, even if you use our CLI tool and scan it, there might still be some UI limitations that you might have caught. So test, test, test. Make sure you try out not only the CLI tool, but also test your UI pieces independently and leverage frameworks as much as you can. RR Docs is a great resource to use. How many of you guys have tried out RR Docs before? Great, so a few, that's pretty good, but I'd like to make that a little bit more. If you're building Lightning components, you should definitely check out RR Docs. That's where you can see everything available inside your org. And we'll actually show you the page and what it looks like in a minute.
All right, so back into the demo. So it's really awesome. We loaded our third-party JavaScript plugin. It's working in the component. We ship it off to someone, and they're looking at it. They're so happy. They can see the address and everything. They start clicking around Lightning, and they're doing some stuff here. And then they come back. Oh, no.
Uh-oh.
All of a sudden, we have an error. So let's see what this error is about. It says the map container is already initialized. So what does that mean? In this case, it means that Leaflet found a container and tried to run l.map on it, but the container that it found already had a map plugin initialized. And so what it points to is that there are actually two DOM nodes with the ID of map in the page. And that's actually something that's happening from Lightning and something we identified. What's happening in the background is that as you navigate from app to app in Lightning, in the Lightning experience, when you go to a page that has a component, the instance is created. When you go somewhere else, the instance isn't completely destroyed or taken away from the DOM. It's just put out of view and out of the viewport. But when you go back, that instance still exists, a new instance is created, and then the code that runs locates two elements in this case. So what's a good way for us to solve this? The problem we're trying to solve is how to identify the container that's specific to the component that we see in front of us. And one place to look would be Aura documentation. So this is the page that shows all of the different API methods that are available from Aura, from Lightning, and also specific to your org. So if you extended anything and have components installed that expose more things, you'll see it here.
Yep. Anything you developed or installed, it will be available listed here, so you can access other components, APIs, or, for example, listen to different events that's available to you. And for this situation, we'll be going into our JavaScript API, and under component, I think you might need to refresh the cache again. That's the thing with dev environments. We always have a little bit of caching going on with logins. There we go. So we happen to know that under the component, there's this awesome method that we can access called component.find. Would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, so we were looking through the docs. We found this method called component.find, and it does exactly what we're trying to do. It scopes into the component that you're working with, and it locates a DOM node. And from there, you can pull the raw element and pass it into plugins. So let's see how that actually works. So the first thing we need to do is allow component.find to actually find the node. It doesn't work with traditional HTML ID attributes. It has a special one called Aura ID. So here's the container that we want to target. I'll add this attribute Aura ID, Aura map to it. And then the next thing we need to do is locate this node in the leaflet initializer. So in the helper, the place where we were passing in a string ID, we're now going to replace this with the actual node. And we're going to leverage the component.find method. After we found the component element, we still need to run one more method to get the raw node, which is compatible with leaflet. After we've saved that, now here we are on the map page. If we navigate away and then come back, no errors.
Perfect. Awesome. So that was a great example of showing you how easy it is to start leveraging our Lightning framework, and you don't really need to, go into your source code of the library that you're using to try and fix certain things, because it's not going to be easy, or try using other things to work around it. Lightning framework will be a great place to get started. Now let's talk about the backup plan. I think the first two parts is pretty simple, kind of how to get started, how to look into the issues. But what if you just can't find a solution to your problem? For example, specific functions you need from your library might not work properly, and you just can't fix that for you. Or for example, the frameworks that you're using, like Angular or some other big frameworks that's not able to run within components. What are some solutions? So Visual Force is still here. It's not going anywhere. Since we launched Lightning, everyone has been asking about it. This is actually a good scenario where Visual Force and Lightning can work together and help you solve some of the bigger issues that you might not be able to take care of. So for this approach, we're actually going to use Visual Force, and we're going to iframe it into our Lightning component. And that is because Visual Force operates under a different window and domain. And so since you have your independent window, you won't have all those dependency issues or being restricted by locker service. Now let's kind of go into the recipe on how to put this together. So first step, of course, create a Visual Force page. And then you'll be adding your third-party JavaScript into it, like how you would do for any Visual Force pages. Once you have your Visual Force page created, you can then create your Lightning component, place it into your Lightning component via iframe. Now, that's all nice, but you won't be able to talk to them and kind of make it interactive, like what a component is expected to react. And so we recommend using things like Windows post message to communicate back and forth. It is an extra layer, but in order to make this work, you kind of have to go around that. And once you get that done, you can still create design files. You can still make your component react to whatever events or ID or information that it needs to get, and then pass back and forth within the Visual Force page, then serve to your user. So I think we're going to show you how we're going to use that on a leaflet example as well.
All right, so back to the demo. So here we are, we got the map, it's working pretty well. It's not breaking when we navigate around. But one extra feature that Leaflet has is it's able to pan from one location to the next as it gets new information. The way that it works in this context is we have this organizational chart on the left that represents people in the org, and they all have addresses. So this person, third party Lightning, has an address here, and then Victor Carrion, if we click, has an address here. What you might have noticed is that the map's actually not moving anywhere.
Yeah, I thought you were from Chicago.
And so what's happening here? We found that it was another artifact of locker service. And what happens is when you use getters and setters on attributes, on objects in locker service, when you're making a component, locker service creates a secure object that wraps around the object that you're setting. What that does is it creates some limitations on editing key values that are part of that object. In this case, we needed to set the map to an object so we can pull it and pass it more data. It was working, but once locker service was on, Leaflet itself could not access some of the key values on that secure object, which it didn't allow it to move around. So we had to find a workaround, and William came in to save the day. So let's look at the recipe and how we did it. So we have a new component. It's called Leaflet iframe. It's the exact same thing as map. The first thing you'll notice is we aren't pulling in the static resources for Leaflet here anymore. This is really just a container for a VF page that does all the JavaScript work. Also, the node that used to contain the map that Leaflet would identify now has an iframe. And this iframe is pointed to a VF page called Leaflet. These are the two main important things. Now we can jump into the actual Leaflet VF page and see what's happening there. So this might look more familiar to the VF people. We're pulling in the static resources, JavaScript and CSS. We have some inline styles. And then we have the actual container for Leaflet to identify. And then when the document's ready, you might recognize some of this code from the very first time we initialized Leaflet that's identifying the map ID and initializing Leaflet. Once it's ready, we want to tell the component that it's ready and that it can show it. So we are leveraging window.parent.post message and sending a generic message. In this case, it's the map and it's complete. And we just hope the component can hear it. Another thing we're adding is a listener for a message. And we pass in this callback function that checks if we get data. From that data, we get coordinates. And then we leverage Leaflet's pan to API method to actually make it move. So on the component side, we need to be able to listen to that first message that is sent from the VF page once Leaflet is loaded. Since we don't have JavaScript libraries to load, we don't have after scripts loaded as a hook to run anymore. We're leveraging the init handler that comes with components and calling a controller method called onInit. OnInit calls a helper. And then here, we're just adding an event listener for a message that then allows Leaflet to pan to a place if it exists. That's where helper.generateMarker comes from. However, if coordinates aren't there yet, there's also a listener for when a record is selected on the component that also calls the same method. And so the cool stuff is in that helper method, just a bunch of callouts and parsing to get the coordinates. And the useful part is once you have the coordinates and you're ready, we're calling this helper method to send the pan message to the map. This helper method simply finds the iframe, targets it, and then uses post message to send the coordinates directly, which then interacts with that receive message. So to see it in action, this is the Leaflet component with the iframe. It doesn't look any different. You can't even tell that it's really in an iframe, except for the fact that when you click around, you actually see panning happening. So what's happening is the messages coming from this left component is able to send something, an event, to the component on the right, which could then propagate it to an iframe and leverage any JavaScript that's running inside of that iframe. You open up a lot of possibilities using this method. One thing to mention is that the post message API method is really great, but you might run into some problems when you get into security review, because in my code, I was allowing any domain to send a message. There is a way to scope that message to the domain of the Lightning component that you're sending it to, and then scope the domain of the Visualforce page, sending the message back so that you don't have that problem. Something to consider if you're creating managed packages.
Yep. So yeah, this is a great demo, and like Victor said, make sure you do the domain restriction when you do interact with your iframe. That's very important to do so to be secure. I think, again, to the demo we just showed you, you do see that it is possible to open up all the full scope of capability using Visualforce iframe, but you do have to do the additional layer setup in order for it to work and act like a component. So let's do a little quick summary. We kind of talked about Locker service, really plan ahead, go back and check out the slides afterwards, understand the phases that you're working with, where are you right now, and are you ready for our full rollout? If not, look into that, use the CLI tool. Lightning Framework is a friend, It's built by our platform, we'll keep enhancing it, so always go check out the OR docs first, understand what you have to leverage. You might not have to use your third-party JavaScript library at all if you just need it for indicating your DOMs and whatnot. But if you have something complex, you can still use it in conjunction. It's likely more reliable and probably more efficient as well versus jQuery or something that might be climbing through your pages just to get certain elements. Test. Use the CLI tool to check compatibility, test all of the UI components in case things don't work properly. And lastly, the Visualforce page. I think the main getaway from here is, yes, it is a way for you to get everything to work, but don't go straight into this path because you kind of lose some of the characteristics of a component, right? You have to build the communication layer every time you want to add an additional feature, function, or even attribute. Let's say for a component that listens to component B on a list view, and now you want to add another event on top of that. Every time you add a new layer, you have to build a post message back and forth, make sure you're retrieving the right information, parsing them properly, and so on. All right, so these are the resources I promised. Some things to help you get started. We have a developer guide on using external JavaScript with components. That's great. I actually put the link from Mozilla on JavaScript strict mode as well to help you get to know about it a little bit more. We have a Trailhead on Lightning components, so if you haven't built a component before, definitely check that out. And one thing as an ISVT you had to add is Partner Zone. So make sure you go check that out. If you build a component and you want to publish it onto our Lightning Exchange, we have sessions on how you can do packaging, deployment, and so on. So that would be a great resource to have. And we have a lot of security breakout sessions. So notice we actually talk a lot about security. Even for the Visualforce approach, you have to make sure security are happy with it. Post message, again, make sure you have the domain set up. But go check out the security breakout sessions. They have quite a lot of speakers and sessions throughout the week as well. So if you want to get to know a little bit more on how to work with Locker service or just make sure your solution is secure, go check that out or even show them your application. All right, so we got a little over 10 minutes. Let's open up for questions.
Sounds like it's on.
For the demo you did, would it have been possible to make the map component like its own component that listens to events?
Could you speak closer to?
Oh, sorry. For the example you did, would it have been possible to make the map component like its own separate component with attributes that you can pass in or event listeners that you could listen for a change from the other slider component?
Yeah, so the question is for the component demo we just showed, can we add additional attributes and let it listen to other events? And yes, actually, when you create a component, you're actually setting up a separate Lightning event. And when you created that event, you can either use a common one within our OR docs. I believe Lightning has a record event that listens to record IDs, or you can create your own event, and it will be documented on the OR docs. So any other developer who wants to work with your component can either use the standard event handler or use the custom one you have created, fire out that event, and your map will react to it accordingly. Any other questions?
Where can we get these slides from?
Oh, so after the session, I'll upload it onto our session record, so you'll be able to access it from there.
My question is, first of all, thank you for the iframe workaround. But although I think I know the answer, does Salesforce have any plans of supporting frameworks? You mentioned Angular, and there are a lot of third-party JavaScript libraries. And I'm just talking about the really mature ones that have been around for many years and are in really high use. Do they plan any native support in Lightning components with Locker service?
So the question is, are we going to support,
Yes,
Angular
because
and
the
other-
frameworks work in a certain way. They do their thing. Us as developers, we can't really change that code in any way. But on the other hand, they do offer a ton of functionality that obviously Salesforce doesn't offer out of the box, and B, it would be not worthwhile to rewrite from scratch. So just wondering if outside of the iframe hack, is there any official plan to keep supporting third-party apps? Because Locker service, as you said, will be enforced starting with Spring 17, so we won't really have a choice.
Yeah, so that's actually something kind of beyond my group.
Okay.
I would kind of redirect that to the Lightning platform team, because they will be the one who kind of supports it. The way we divide it into kind of the layers is why I have to talk about Locker service first is because Locker is actually a layer on top of that. So the Locker scope is there to stay. We're not going to do any changes to that. I'm not sure if they're going to do whitelisting or some sort for the libraries. But in the interim, like I said, Visualforce unfortunately is the main way to go. I've still seen a lot of full Visualforce page apps within Lightning as well. So that's still another approach as well if you do need like a full-on framework application for your page.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, I have a question with regard to the events, right? So there is Salesforce One events. So Lightning is mobile ready already, right?
Yep.
So the question is, we have standard events in Salesforce One, and then there's custom events, and it could be an application event, or it could be the other kind of event within Lightning, right? What would be the way in which we could kind of trigger a standard Salesforce One event if you're trying to expose a Lightning component to interact with a standard component on the Salesforce One? I mean, is there like a best practice? Do you see any anti-patterns where there are conflicts between events? I just wanted your thoughts on the same.
Good question. Actually, I haven't thought about that one in a while for the Salesforce One pieces. I know if you use components between each other, even in Salesforce One, when you serve the pages, that should still react to it. Because all you're doing is firing a JavaScript event, nothing else, nothing proprietary or special. You can even put a component into a Visualforce page and then have a JavaScript fire from the Visualforce page. Your component will still react to it accordingly. Now, if you're talking about like the page navigation and whatnot that's specific to your Salesforce One application, then right now you still have to fire those JavaScript events, unfortunately, because that's a specialized one for like record navigation and so on. Yeah, and then of course there's always like deep linking. That's a whole different situation. But those are restricted by the platform you're working on, not what we support not. Because Locker itself is purely JavaScript. All right. Well, we'll be hanging around. So actually, yeah.
So in our docs, you have the UI namespace, you have the Aura namespace, and the force namespace. Isn't there like an issue where if you're using the Aura namespace within Lightning, you may have issues when Locker services turn on? So like, should you avoid the Aura namespace in your stuff?
Basically, if you're running anything with Lightning, it's going to be under the Lightning namespace, which will be under Locker service.
Okay.
The only one that's outside of it is Visualforce, because it's under the what we call the classic namespace.
Okay.
All right, well, we'll be hanging around, so if you have any questions, come up, and yeah, thank you for coming.
Thank you.